Okay, so we're going to talk especially or maybe specifically about CSS specificity. One take. Specificity, that is to say using the correct selectors to make sure that the hierarchy and the cascade work to win the battle of which elements get chosen in a page, is one of the things that often frustrates people a lot about CSS, what leads to a lot of anger about why things aren't working or displaying as expected. And really getting to grips with this is something that will save you a lot of debugging time in the future, and will also just make CSS more logical for you going forwards. The basic idea is this: there are rules about how a page dictates which has the greater standing, rules about which is the most important selector and which one has overall control over which CSS settings are going to be implemented. And knowing the correct way to structure your CSS will often alleviate a lot of these issues, but generally also knowing why something is winning out and how you can match it or overwrite it will also get you out of a lot of tricky situations. I have this seesaw here, which I've set a simple setting on it to rotate 15 degrees to the right, so it goes blue. However, if I set an identical setting underneath it, seesaw, except say go to -15, it goes right. So why is the second one one? That's just simple cascade rules, because of if you put two rules together, the last one wins. So because of the second person says do the exact same thing but go the other way, tips to the red side. What if, for instance though, there was a second class? So we chain that together and say seesaw other. Now it tips back to blue because you're targeting two classes rather than one. So in this scenario, adding an additional class onto something and making sure you're targeting both of those classes means you're sort of saying this is worth double points. I'm making double hierarchy, and it's going to outrank scenarios where it's only one. It's considered to be more important. What if though there was an ID on the element, SSW? So now if I in fact went away from all these and just went SSW, boom, it goes back to the blue side. An ID is generally considered more important in a CSS hierarchy rule, and it will then outrank any classes on the same element, just because of an ID is considered kind of quite powerful. This is probably a reason not to use IDs in CSS selectors anyway. IDs are useful for JavaScript to identify elements. IDs generally should only be one per element on the page, so you wouldn't want to catch all lots of things with IDs. CSS, you want to be a collection of classes that can be reused in different areas. However, it's worth noting here, if I add SSW, it will tip back to the red side because of you're using a combination of both selectors are using the ID, but this one's also got the bonus classes, so it's going to win on that battle. Now what about a parent? So if there was a div that went outside, let's just level this up. So now there's a parent class around the outside. So I do parent space and now select that element with inside. So again, the blue is winning because you're now reaching higher above. You're suggesting that this selector has more control because it's taking a top down. It has a hierarchy. So now this second selector, which is just internal to the element, is not going to have the same amount of control and power as that top one. But then you can just keep going higher and higher. So if I added HTML body parent, you're again. But then, you know, if I add HTML body parent, you're just reaching higher and higher up. It says my dad is bigger than your dad. You can keep going for a more important selector to the top, and that way you're just making more importance to your selector to solve how far down the chain you're reaching from in order to make this selector important. There are just also little nuances for things. So here, if we've leveled them up again, but I add an extra little attribute onto something, you know, so on this element I'm going to add an X, which is equal to I. And here on the blue, I'm going to also target where the X is equal to I. We've tipped it back over to blue. So again, scenarios where you've got matching styles on something, you don't want to invent extra classes. You could possibly hook onto attributes on that element, and again, that will just help tip it over. And that could include things like the checked property on a checkbox, or the kind of selected on text, or things like that, little attributes about elements. The big hitter though is that if you really want to win, you can go inline. So I can add a style tag and then just directly write that style on, And that way it's going to consider that much more important. You're very directly attaching some styles onto that element, and that way it's going to not really worry so much about any hierarchical rules that are being applied to it from a style sheet, because the element has got its own inline baked style. And at that point you're going to have to tip the balance, and you're going to have to go for broke with important. So adding the important, which you've possibly come across before, you've certainly been warned about before, will see you win the hierarchy battle even against somebody's inline style. Important. It's kind of the nuclear button, and it's one to be very cautious of because of it generally wins. Generally these are not things you want to get into. You'd rather that every CSS element has a very logical chain of command on it, as in these are the general settings on it, then these are specific settings, and these are the ones to the instance where it's being used. And it should have a very logical pattern, which if you're following, or if you've implemented your CSS correctly, everything will generally have the exact styles you'd expect it to. These are really scenarios where multiple things are all fighting with each other and you just need to win out, and you go with important. It's seen as a bit of a nightmare because of what happens if somebody needs to overwrite that style. You'll have to do another important, and then you just get into important wars, and you're getting to such high stakes that generally it becomes harder and harder for anyone to ever win out in these scenarios, and you get quite a mesh of disastrous CSS. A useful way to work out, maybe if you're trying to work out where you're going wrong or what's happening or why an element is not getting the styles you want, is usually in the dev tools. So here we're just going to find that seesaw element. You'll see on here there's the inline setting, which has been crossed out, and you'll see here the important, which is winning. If I go to the computed tab, here it just tells you what all the actual current attributes it's reading and have been set on the element are. And if I search on there for transform, I can then see these are all the properties on it. I can see the one that's winning, and I can even click that arrow and it will take me to that line of the CSS. It's a bit of a sort of silly example here, but if you had a massive project and you had all these external CSS libraries and you weren't sure which element was winning, but you also weren't sure which ones you were losing out to, you could search through here, you could find exactly which one is winning. You could look at its selectors and see if you can outrank it and win. I've got a little challenge on this one, which I'll put in the description for you to have a go at. Basically, it's my Houdini who's trying to escape from the sort of CSS shackles that have been put on him. So I'm going to have a little go from what I remember of this one. We're going to try and get rid of these handcuffs which he's shackled with. So I'm going to set handcuffs to display none. I don't imagine that works. No. However, there's an ID, so I'm going to try that. No. So then let's see, is there a parent? There's a parent div with the ID of Houdini. Does that work? Yes, there you go. So I've got the handcuffs off. If you have time, have a go at this. Try and get, there's two chains and then there's a straight jacket, from what I remember is really difficult. You basically have to just use every property you can. But yeah, just aside from this, specificity is really one of those tricky things in CSS, but once unblocked, it will all make a lot more sense to you, and it will help you think logically about how best to write and structure CSS to avoid getting into these clashes and having those problems. Anyway, that's all. Please leave a comment with any questions or any clarifications. I'm happy to help, and best of luck. Ta-ra!